You own a small business, and it ain't easy, and it may be going okay. Or you could be stuck and barely making ends meet. It's about time for a pivot. Welcome to Small Business Pivots. It's time for you to generate some cash, some real cash. How does $1 million sound? Only 9% of small businesses earn over $1 million annually. But your host is a business coach and an entrepreneur. And we're going to talk to the small business owners who've done the $1 million and more. It's time to be inspired. Welcome to the 7-Figure Club. This is Small Business Pivots. And now your host, Michael Morrison.
All right, Small Business Pivots. We have another special guest all the way from California today, and I know that we have some listeners there in California. What part of California are you in?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, fantastic. And the weather's there beautiful all year round?
Yeah, people seem to think that way, but I actually live close to the coast, so I get May gray and June gloom is what we call it here. So it's not quite all the time that great, but pretty much we have great weather. Yes.
Awesome. So your name, company, a little bit about today, where you are in life. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I'm Brett Magpiong. I'm the founder of the Rudius Strategies Group. And it's a coaching, speaking, and I wrote a book just recently, and it's about to launch on Amazon on May 23rd. And so, that's kind of the background. I had retired from 35 plus years in the wealth management space back in 2022, and right now I'm in what I'll call the third period of my life. If you think of a hockey match. First period being study, second period being some form of success, and the third period being significance. I'm wanting to give back and share some of the experiences that I had in my lifetime, as well as in my career and my family and what have you. So it's the third period of a hockey game is where I'm at right now.
I love it. In your background there, with purpose, on purpose, and you wanting to share and help others in your third period is perfect for the show. So the purpose of our show today is to help small business owners hit that $1 million mark or more. Most of us, we have a mindset that we are never going to get there, or how did someone else do it and not me? And I know you have an incredible, inspiring story of your life, but then also some of the people that you've worked with in wealth management, like the Richard Branson type caliber people. So let's start with your life first. What was your childhood like? We like to kind of share our story so that others can maybe relate to some of the challenges or upbringings that we each had.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I grew up in a very lower middle class household in Southern California. My father was a city of Los Angeles civil engineer his entire career. My mom was a homemaker, and I have one older brother. The first test I ever remember failing as a kid was name the 4 seasons. And I said football, basketball, baseball, and hockey.
That's awesome.
In my family, those were the only seasons, if you will, growing up. But formative years for me is that my mom and dad ultimately split up, and I was I saw them both, but I was living with my mom, predominantly, and we struggled financially, and it was very formative for me in terms of my upbringing and kind of helping me think about what I wanted to do and what the future might hold for me in terms of my career and what have you.
So educational wise, did you have any challenges there? A student, I know a lot of business owners, even some wealthy people I know, weren't very studious, if you will. Did you experience that? Or
I was actually was very successful in schooling, frankly. And fortunately, I was one of these people that probably a lot of people don't like, and that was that I could cram for a test at the last, kind of thing. And I could usually ace the test or what have you.
Your thought on people not liking you on that is accurate. Because there were some people in my class, I'm like, how? Like, I've studied for weeks and you studied the night before and aced it.
Yeah, listen, my roommates in college were pretty, pretty amazed at times. They would be, studying away, and I'd be playing darts or something like that in the living room, and we were in the same class.
Yeah, let's move on. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. So
that still kills me today. So you went to college, and
I did. I went to school at a state school in California, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I was a rugby player there, as well as a student, but I wasn't involved in a fraternity, but rugby was almost like a fraternity for me. And, again, with my background being very much jock oriented and competitive, and missed that competition once I left high school, going into college. I got involved with rugby, and it was great in terms of just, competition and how that also framed up for me, how I worked, post college and what have you.
Very cool. So rugby kind of includes different elements of different sports, does it not? There's some toughness and roughness, and maybe some rules aren't followed from time to time. It looks like. I'm like, what? You can do that?
What rules? That's the question,
okay,
right? It's interesting. This was, over 35 years ago, and rugby was not that big of a sport here in the United States. It is a little bit more so now, but it's a combination of football, soccer, hockey, it seems like lacrosse, all in a sense in one. Here's what the interesting thing is that I did play football in high school. And when you're wearing a bunch of pads, throwing your body at a situation is a little bit easier than when you're not wearing any pads whatsoever. It actually turned out to be a sport that required a lot of skill and a lot of, kind of smarts as it pertained to, where you were going to put your shoulder and where you put your arm, and that kind of thing. So it was good.
Yeah. I never thought about that. I guess you would be less likely to, without the guard on. Really hit somebody pretty hard. So,
exactly.
So in college, did you get a degree, any specialty?
I did. Yeah. I had a degree in business administration, and a focus on accounting. And then, after I graduated, I started with a large public accounting firm. But here's the funny story about this. Again, I go back to kind of these little stories inside of stuff. So the recruiter for Price Waterhouse, it turns out, was the name of the firm. They come on campus, and I go through this campus interview, and at the time there were 8 large accounting firms, and they were called the Big 8. And she sits down and she says to me, tell me what you know about the Big 8. And I said, well, it's a football conference in the Midwest somewhere, isn't it?
That was actually our conference where I'm
exactly
in Oklahoma. So
exactly.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, and I was dead serious. I literally did not know that this was the Big 8. She had this look on her face of like, is he messing with me, or what's the story here? And when she realized, I see this now years later, I think that when she realized I was actually authentic in my ignorance, and was being just completely honest, it probably landed me the job, because, in terms of them wanting to have personalities and what have you at Price Waterhouse, I think that was kind of the story there. So that was kind of an interesting thing.
That is interesting. So you mentioned earlier, I don't want to let the time pass by without mentioning your book. You did mention you were publishing a book in May.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So the title of the book is The Delta Theorem, an innovative framework for being fully alive and truly wealthy. All right. So here's what the story is behind this. I worked with folks, as you mentioned earlier, that were Richard Branson type wealth folks. Literally, we were investing and handling their financial affairs for generations, in a sense, to come. And one of the things that I found in working with them for over 30 years was that they oftentimes came to me and would ask me questions like this: what is the money going to do to my kids? Or why do I feel like I don't have that much time on my hands? Or, what are my relationships? Or what is the legacy of the money? It was oftentimes less about the investment management work and more around these other areas of wealth, be they relational, be they physical, be they time wealth, all these things that they oftentimes were asking me about that. So I kind of had that in terms of background. For me personally, living in Los Angeles, I found myself oftentimes in my car on the 405 freeway, which is the major artery here in Los Angeles, stuck in traffic. And I would be thinking to myself, wow, there's got to be something more. And I think that a lot of us have that feeling. There's got to be something more. And it's, you talk about pivot points in terms of, what you're talking about with your folks. This was a pivot point for me. My story felt very large, just like all of our stories feel large. I'm married. I have a house. I have a daughter. I have a golden retriever. I'm in the community and that kind of stuff. And yet on the 405 freeway, I was feeling like, wow, there's got to be something more here. While my story feels large, and it is, there's something more. Mm-hmm. And so when I combine this notion of clients that had all of this financial wealth that were still saying there's got to be more, and me who didn't have that financial wealth and saying there's got to be more, I started to explore this idea of what are the things that can happen to make us come fully alive. And that's what the Delta Theorem book is about. It is literally a math equation that looks like this: alpha over p cubed by EF squared equals delta.
Woo!
Exactly. And here's what it means. Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. And in this framework, it represents your primary purpose, your one thing, your reason for being. It sits on top of a foundation that's p cubed, which represents your priorities, your principles, and your passion. And in fact, when you look at our purpose, the foundation of our priorities, our principles, and passion start to make our purpose come alive. I know that when I'm coaching people, I look at them and I say, tell me what your purpose is. This is what they say: I have no idea.
Yeah, all the time.
I have no idea. It's too big of a question.
Yeah.
And by the way, if I tell you what it is, does that mean that it can never be something different in the future? Like, do I lose the option of my purpose being something else in the future? And so I don't start there. I start with, tell me what your priorities are. Well, I'm married, or I'm not married, or I've got a career, or I've got kids, or, we can tease out those priorities. That's why it's foundational. Mm-hmm. I say to them, what do you stand for? That's your principles. Oftentimes people don't write down their principles. They just know they have them, or maybe they don't know they have them, right? But that's another component of foundation. And then your passion. What is it that makes you really, come alive? So when I work with those kinds of things, then people's purpose start to come alive.
Yeah. Would you say
that's part of the Delta Theorem?
That's fantastic. And yes, I would have never passed that test either. So would you say that your principles, would that be similar to core values?
Yeah, they are. They're very similar to core values. What you stand for. A lot of companies, they talk about, and in the places that I've been at, we had our core values. They were the things that were the non-negotiables, right? They are the things that, like, no, we stand on these things. For me personally, for instance, one of my principles is, and a core value for me is, let my yes be yes and my no be no. If I say yes to something, I'm going to follow through on that. But it doesn't mean that I say yes to everything.
Right.
I mean, sometimes I can say no to something, but I'm going to let my yes be yes and my no be no. And now suddenly my ability to make decisions inside of that principle becomes a lot easier than if I don't know what I stand for at all, and I'm making yeses and nos all over the place. So, it's that kind of a thing.
That's a golden nugget. I have a similar program that we do with core values. And what I found, because I study a lot of neuroscience, and so what I found was in the principles, the core values, if you don't know those, first of all, you'll have a hard time making decisions. You won't make decisions. You'll procrastinate at times, but then also it kind of gives us a gut feeling. If something's not aligned and we can't figure out why we feel weird about it, but it's because when somebody tells me that, I'm like, you don't know your core values.
Yeah.
There's something that's not aligning with your decision you just made or the decision you have to make. There's something not aligned. And so that equation or formula that you're talking about is golden. So when does that get published, and where can people find it?
Yeah, May 23rd. It will be available on Amazon. So yeah, it's May 23rd.
Okay, so it's on Amazon is where they can
Amazon May 23rd. Yeah, it's called the Delta Theorem. Right now, you could go to deltatheorem.com, www.deltatheorem.com, and you can see the landing page for the book and sign up for discounts and so on and so forth.
Very cool. Well, we'll put that in the show notes and make sure that everybody can find that for you. So going back to college, was it intimidating, or after college, was it intimidating going from, you said lower middle class, is that right, growing up, to, because that's how I grew up.
Yeah.
Was it intimidating meeting or working with people that had wealth? Did you find anything different in them? Because I know a lot of us that grew up that way, if we've never been introduced to it, it can be, we all react differently to it. What was kind of your experience?
Yes. I would say that the intimidation had less to do with upbringing for me than it did from having earned the right to be heard.
Huh.
Like, I knew that I didn't have the experience at the time, early on in my career in working with some of these folks. And so what was really fascinating was, I was never the lead advisor at the start. Mm-hmm. I was working for folks that were the lead advisor. And I would feel a little bit like, am I going to get invited back to this meeting if I don't say something smart? Because I'm in the midst of not only my colleague who's got many years of experience, but oftentimes these giants of industry. And the intimidation factor was more like, as I said, am I going to get invited back? Am I going to be thought to be, the imposter syndrome type thing inside of that? Maybe I shouldn't have been at Price Waterhouse. That's where my mindset would go versus, no, I grew up in lower middle class and what have you. That part of it was because I'm competitive, as I mentioned before, and I desired to move forward. That was actually a driver for me to feel like I was there for a reason, but my experience level, I was very clear, was not, at the point, maybe I'm going to say something stupid, and so keep your mouth shut type thing.
Mm-hmm. In your formula, because that's part of what I see with some people, is some people have this drive like you do.
Yeah.
You did rugby and everything else. Did you discover anything in your formula that would separate why someone has that drive and others don't? Did you find anything? Does that have anything to do with it?
Yes, it does. In fact, I didn't finish explaining the formula because what I did talk about was all the things about purpose, passion, priorities, and principles, which is all theoretical. And what I realized that we can have a bunch of head knowledge, but if we don't convert the head knowledge to heart knowledge, then it does us really no good, right? I can know what my purpose is, but if it sits up on a shelf somewhere that is all shiny and looks nice, or I can say it to somebody else, but I do nothing with it, then that's a problem. And that's where E comes in. Because I said alpha over P cubed by E. E is effort. E is like you're putting things into action. So, your question in like, did I find like that was the case? It's inside of E. It's inside of like the activities that we do, the accountability that we find ourselves in, or training ourselves to be able to do this. Effort is about training. It's not about it just happens. Yeah. You actually have to get comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes, to be able to do that kind of stuff. And then finally, another portion of this is that F squared, which I said was EF squared. F stands for failure. And in most cases, we, myself included, view failure as a negative. And in fact, this is the only place where math comes up in this equation. Because when you square a negative in math, it turns out to be a positive. So the concept here is that F squared is the learning that comes from failure. That is so critical for us. So if you take your purpose, principles, passion, priorities, all this head knowledge, okay, now I want to convert it to heart knowledge. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to put effort in there. I'm going to train myself to be able to do that. And guess what? I'm going to make some mistakes along the way. And when I learn from all that mistakes, all of that equals delta, which in the Greek alphabet is change. And so the concept here is, how do I create change, make an impact, come alive, make a difference? If I go through and work through these various things, I put myself in the best position, not guaranteed anything, right? The best position to have an impact, to come fully alive, to be truly wealthy. Like I talked about, not wealthy financially, but like all facets of wealth, relationally, financially, with my time and that kind of stuff. That's the concept inside the Delta theorem. Your eyes rolled up inside your head when I first said it to you, and now I explained it. It's really just a way to remember the various elements that are critical for us to be able to be put in a position to make a change and to have an impact in our lives.
I often say my greatest lessons learned are failures. Absolutely. So I can relate to that. So I always tell myself to fail fast so we can just get it over with and I can learn something from it.
Well, it's so interesting if failure is as a result of risk taking. True. And a life that takes no risk whatsoever fails by default. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's really interesting. Yeah. You just fail because you didn't take any risk whatsoever. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's a funny, fine, a fine knife edge, right? It's just, and yet it's like you said, I learned the most from my failures, and I talk about my failures in the book. Just that's the deal. These things happen, and I failed at these particular things, and I learned from them just like you learned from them, just like your audience learns from their failures too.
Couple of questions, and I don't want you to give away the whole book, but how did you come up with this formula, one? And then number two, a couple of those failures that maybe you pivoted from that really changed the direction of your life.
Yeah. Wow. How did I come up with this?
Do we have enough time for that?
Yeah, right. Well, there are a lot of books out there, and I'm a reader. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of books and a lot of great material, not just books. There's just material that's available, podcasts, all kinds of different things that are available. That what I found was they took a lot of these concepts almost in isolation. They talk about failure alone, but they didn't tie it up with purpose. Or they talked about, go to any graduation ceremony these days, and the keynote speaker is likely going to say to the people that are graduating, follow your passion, right? Mm-hmm. Follow your passion. Yeah. That's like the phrase.
Right.
That's like, it's good, but it's also pretty dangerous, right? Really? I had a passion for golf. I wanted to be a professional golfer, and yet I had a daughter, a wife. I was shooting in the 90s.
Yeah. You had some challenges.
Exactly. Obstacles. So follow your passion is like in isolation is kind of potentially dangerous. Mm-hmm. But follow your passion when blended with priorities is a different story, right? Or when it's blended with your principles, it's a different story. So what I found was that all of these things that I had been reading or just exposing myself to were all great in isolation, but I thought that there can be something that could be put together. The head knowledge, the heart knowledge, all of these things. I went through a coaching training program, and part of that was physical training. And I learned about, how to have a powerful why and how it gets you through having that powerful why, a lot of different things, physical, mental, emotional stresses. Wow, why am I doing this? That purpose was all very, very important. So I just started to piece these things together. And then frankly, I work out in the morning and I'm with my dog and I'm thinking, and somehow this thing came together for me. I can't fully explain how it turned into an equation other than, I thought, wow, that's kind of, interesting. Well, that's not entirely true. I came across a bumper sticker and it said this: life is tough. It's even tougher if you're stupid.
Oh, yeah.
and I thought to myself, wow, why is that such a crass sounding thing, but so true? It wasn't cynical like life is tough and then you die. Those are other, kind of bumper stickers that life is tough. It's even tougher if you're stupid.
Yeah.
And so what I thought to myself is, well, what's the opposite of stupid? It's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really wanted to do was to figure out a way that was a framework that could say, how could I live wisely? Just that kind of thing. And so that's where the genesis of the Delta theorem, why it kind of came to be.
Well, I can't wait to read it, as I'm sure a lot of our small business owners cannot as well, because this is very fascinating. And I often say the biggest obstacle for most small business owners is mindset.
Yeah.
And so getting through that mindset, when I tell business owners, we got to make a plan, they're like, I don't even know where to start. So this book would help someone discover what those principles are and the passion and make planning a little bit easier. And then hopefully taking action. I just posted something the other day recently on LinkedIn about which do you think is tougher, making a plan or taking action? And somebody asked me why one would be harder than the other. And I said, because most people don't even know where to start with a plan. So they procrastinate. And then those that do make a plan, they don't take action. The effort's not there. So this book is going to be fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on it. So some of the pivots and fails that you went through without giving the book, if there's some that you share.
Yeah. So in the book, I tell what I call an epic failure. I had just started a new position up, and I was based in San Francisco, and my family was down here in LA, and we decided that I would go up there and spend the week and then fly home and what have you. And so I was a senior executive and early on in my tenure there, and I was trying to prove myself, like we all are, right? And basically I ran into some kryptonite, and kryptonite looked like this. It was somebody who worked for me who was a former college football player and was a lot larger than I was. And I decided that I was going to imbibe in some drinks at a happy hour with him. I won't, kind of share what the, details around that. You can get the idea there.
I can already picture this.
Yeah. And when I went to the airport to try to board my plane on a Friday night to come home, they wouldn't let me on board. Right. And so, here's where the real kind of hard part about that was that my wife and daughter, my daughter is, 12 years old or something like that. They're at LAX waiting for me to arrive. And I never get off the plane. And I wasn't allowed to make any phone calls or anything like that. They had no idea what was going on with me. So the epic failure nature of that was that I had to go home and, look at my wife, look at my daughter, and, explain myself, which was not explainable. You could say, listen, I was trying to establish myself inside of, my new position and that kind of stuff, and justify that with my mindset and that kind of stuff. No, it just not good. Right. And so, it was a pivot point for me. It was a realization that wow, I have a daughter that's like, she's a sponge. She's looking at me, and do I apologize? What do I do? Do I, deal with it directly with her? Is it an opportunity for me, for her to learn something from me inside of that kind of stuff? And, even for my relationship with my wife, there was a trust factor that she felt. I was all the way up in San Francisco. She was down here. It is already naturally kind of like, what's happening with inside that. So it was a real opportunity for me to just pause, to, realize, wow, if my yes is yes and my no is no, like my principles, what they were, then integrity has to do with making sure that those principles, my priorities, were in line with that kind of thing. So I, hated it, still sting from it, because I just dislike the feeling of what I put them through, just put them through. And yet it was a great pivot for me. And it really helped me a lot in terms of just growing up and maturing from that standpoint, even though I was grown up and felt like I was, mature.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because the purpose of our show is obviously for pivots. But what I tell a lot of small business owners, those that I know that have made it, if you will, past that $1 million and far surpassed it, a lot of their pivots weren't in business.
Yeah.
It was in life.
Yeah.
It was circumstances or events like what you just described. And, they're always, a lot of small business owners are just looking for this magical pill. They see all these ads on social media that we can 10X your business and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it starts within.
Yeah.
Which is why your book is going to be so helpful for so many.
Yeah.
What, you were talking about some of the wealthy people, and we talked about Richard Branson, and I don't remember I know we talked about this. I don't remember if I said it earlier on the show, but one of his famous quotes, something along the lines that every big business started small. So working with some of those the wealthier crowd, what were some of the things that you may have noticed that they did to continue growing their wealth? Or was it just personal mindset?
Yeah, I think that by the time I was working with them, it was less about growing their wealth than it was preserving their wealth. Okay. So, because they had been highly, highly successful and what have you. But I was able to look at how they got to where they got to. And I think that's more pertinent to what, you're talking about here. I had one client who, ended up being on the Forbes 50 list.
Wow.
And he was somebody that literally, 20 years earlier, he was in the entertainment industry, and 20 years earlier, he was just kind of schlepping, TV scripts around. And what happened was that somebody came to him and said, "Hey, we're looking for a new show. We've got a new channel or a new channel, and we'd like to get some, programming on there." And he pulled out a video and stuck it in there. "No, I don't like that." Pulled out another video, stuck it in. "No, I don't like that." Went to the video that he thought was up on the top shelf. He said that he thought, "This will never be anything that I show to anybody." And he pulled it down and he showed it to them. And it turned out to be this franchise that was just off the charts.
Wow.
It turns out he owned 100% of the rights to everything associated with it, which is very, very rare around content like that. Usually rights are sold off. He owned toy rights. He owned,
wow.
everything. And basically he was able to parlay that, unbeknownst to him at the time, into what ultimately landed him on the Forbes 50 list. So, and what it was for him was that he just made sure that he followed through on what they call luck is, right? Where opportunity and preparation meet each other. And that's really what it was. And he wasn't afraid to go there and grab that video and say, "Okay, I'm going to show this one too," and wasn't embarrassed, enough to say that I'm not going to show this one because I don't want to show it. It'll be embarrassing, on me, if you will. Then like, this is what, that potentially could be there to do something very, very small. What's interesting is that it's the little decisions in life where all the big decisions are made.
Yeah, that's powerful.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Little decision. We think, like you alluded to previously, we think it's in these big pivot points, these big decisions. It's actually not.
Yeah.
It's in the little things that like you just kind of do. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Sometimes like I say no to a yes, and it's like that little thing just undermines in there. Or I'm not going to pull that little video off that thing and show it to somebody because I'm embarrassed what they might think about me inside this. No, that can't necessarily be the case. And so, that's what he did. Anyway, I had many stories like that of these folks that it went back to this little kind of like thing that happened that was just significant in their lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I, kind of think of situations or stories like that of business owners that give up. And I just say, don't, I mean, you can't make it any simpler than that. I often say, first off, you have to get serious. If you're tired of the status quo, you have to be tired of the status quo. Get serious to change it and make a plan using your formula.
Yep.
And then take action.
Yeah.
And it's so there. No one has to buy another self-help book ever again. That's it. We just figured it out. Between your book and my 3 steps, we are going to be famous. We're going to be that guy you were just talking about. We're going to be famous.
It's like Austin. It's like an Austin Powers movie in here, right?
Yeah.
Take the world.
So what, you got another story or two? We're getting close to out of time, or do you have any other principles or things that you'd like to share with small business owners to give them hope to keep pushing through?
Yeah. Here's a story that happened to me way, way, way back. I graduated college. I had this job lined up at Price Waterhouse. I didn't have a nickel to my name, honestly. I had one suit when I started at Price Waterhouse. The only thing I did was got like 3 ties and like 4 shirts. And that was just the way that it was. Right. So, but I managed to have about, I don't know, the summer off, and I backpacked through Europe. Right. And that's back in the days when you could kind of do that. And I literally had a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a Eurail pass, and a hitchhiker's thumb is basically what it was. And I traveled around. One of the things that I landed in was in Florence, Italy. And not everyone gets to go to these places. I haven't been back. So, it's not like I go there all the time. I went there and I landed in Florence, Italy, and there was a museum where I went inside, and I'm not a big museum guy. It's not like this is, I know big things about art and stuff.
Yeah.
But what was just absolutely fascinating was this. There were these statues that were unfinished works of Michelangelo. And what I mean by that is they were blocks of marble that had an arm coming out of it. And it was like the most perfect arm you could possibly imagine, but everything else was just marble, right? There was 4 of these things. They're actually called the prisoners. I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
But perfectly described, because they're prisoners waiting to get, released or to escape or what have you. Okay. So they have that lining this museum hallway. And then you turn this corner, and at the end of this hallway is the statue of the David, which is, 14 feet tall. And it's just an amazing thing that like literally takes your breath away. And why I share this story is that years later, I thought about that. And it's actually part of the book that I wrote about. I thought about the analogy of what we're looking at there. It's like we are kind of like prisoners. We're this raw material, and we know that like inside there's like something ready to be broken out of that. It takes Michelangelo's to help us get out of there, right? Yeah. It takes you on a podcast to like chip away for somebody to say, you've got this in you. You can do this type of thing, right? And so Michelangelo's come along in the form of coaches or teachers or parents or pastors or you name it, right? And then what happens is that we come alive. We are fully alive. And when we're fully alive in that splendor and glory, it has an impact on people's lives, right? That's what I saw in that museum. I didn't know it at the time. I thought about it afterwards of like, what a great way to set this thing up. showing that like this is like what the raw material is, and this is what can happen at the end. Unfortunately, our lives kind of like look like this. Our chips are a little bit not so great, or the material is a little bit, blemished or whatever the case is. And we stay stuck inside of the hallway, inside of the blocks, instead of figuring out how do we become the David that we are meant, kind of to be. That's what the Delta theorem really is all about at the end of the day. I mean, I'm trying to give a chisel to people and like chisel away at this kind of thing. Work with a coach to chisel with you around this stuff, but come alive, because when you do, everyone else gets the benefit from that. I did at the foot of the David. I mean, I was blown away, right? It's just,
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And when you're look, you and I both have experience when people are fully alive. And when you're in the presence of those folks, you come alive too. Right. I do. Yep. I mean, I just dig it, right? I dig it when somebody is really smoking, in there fully alive. And it could be a small business owner that's just like, this is what they do. They love it. They dig it. This is what they're doing. And they get in this flow state and they are fully alive and they are David inside of their business. And when they're David, they're going to get to that $1 million. I can't guarantee that, but they're going to be a better place to like kind of do that.
They're definitely going to feel more successful.
They're going to feel it. That's right.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of, well, let me back up. When I ask entrepreneurs, do they feel successful? Most of them can't answer that at all because most of them don't. But the ones that actually, without a second in between the question and their answer, they said yes. And I asked them what it was. Happiness was always one of the answers. Yeah. Because they're happy at what they're doing.
That's right.
They're happy in life, so it's not always a dollar amount about success, so this is all good stuff. So what else can you tell us about you before we move off here? Any like websites? You mentioned that earlier before. Where can we find you in maybe 5 to 10 years? Do you have some more impact yet to do in your life?
Thank you for that. Yes. So look, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Brett Magpiong, or at Twitter. You can find me there, www.deltatheorem.com, any one of those three, frankly, and you're going to be able to find, and there's, other, links to places and that kind of stuff. So, that's it. I in terms of 10 years out or what have you from now, I'm very, very interested in frameworks for people to coach people. I mean, the Delta theorem is one, but inside the Delta theorem is like, there's more frameworks like around effort. How can we help people to be trained into wholeheartedness, right? I mean, nothing worse than to do stuff half-heartedly. Right. And yet, what is it that means to be wholehearted, physically, emotionally, mentally, instinctually? You talked about gut feeling and that kind of stuff. Instinctually, naturally, inside of our personality, and spiritually. Those are 6 kind of core competencies. How do we train folks up in a framework to be able to do that? So, hopefully that will be somewhere out there in the future. We'll see.
Well, it sounds like you have a few more books to write or some online courses or something to expand on your first #1 bestseller when it comes out.
Thank you. Yes. All
right. Well, you've been a joy and a pleasure, and you've filled us with all kinds of nuggets to help small business owners. So I certainly appreciate it. Any final words of wisdom?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me on there on your show. And I was a small business owner myself, so I understand, kind of the challenges that are inside there. And as you said, stick to it. Really just stick to it and tap into that grit. And it's worth it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Small Business Pivots. A lot of small business owners are feeling stuck, bogged down, barely making ends meet. But it's Michael's passion to help you change all of it. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful advice from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on YouTube at Business Ownership Simplified. See you next time on Small Business Pivots.